My name is Amber Wright and I'm 28 years old, 3 years sober, yet my family still doesn't trust me enough to include me in our Thanksgiving dinner. You're not ready to sit with everyone yet, my mother said on the phone, her voice gentle but firm. The familiar sting of rejection washed over me as I realized that despite all my progress, I was still paying for my past. What my parents didn't understand was that by leaving me alone that day, they were about to spark a chain of events that would change everything. Before I tell you what happened when I chose to stay home that Thanksgiving, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and subscribe if you want more stories about rebuilding life after addiction. Before the painkillers took over my life, I was the golden child of the Wright family. I graduated with honors from high school, went to a respectable state university, and had dreams of becoming a physical therapist. My parents, Thomas and Diana Wright, couldn't have been prouder. My older sister Emily was the responsible one with a corporate job and a perfect husband, while my younger brother Jake was the charming athlete who could do no wrong. We were picture perfect, at least on the surface. Everything changed when I was 22. I was driving home from my part-time job at the campus fitness center when a drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into the driver's side of my car. The impact shattered my left femur and pelvis and left me with 3 broken ribs. The physical pain was excruciating, but the mental trauma of the crash haunted me even more. My doctor prescribed oxycodone for the pain. At first I took it exactly as prescribed, but as the weeks stretched into months, I found myself counting the minutes until my next dose. When my prescription ran out, I convinced my doctor I was still in terrible pain. He extended it, but with increasing reluctance. I never intended to become addicted, no one ever does, but the pills didn't just take away my physical pain, they numbed the anxiety and flashbacks from the accident. Soon I was doctor shopping, visiting multiple physicians with various complaints to get more prescriptions. When that wasn't enough, I found dealers. My college savings disappeared, then my laptop, then jewelry my grandmother had left me. My family noticed something was wrong during my sister's wedding. I had disappeared to the bathroom multiple times and was alternating between being eerily calm and inexplicably irritable. When my father found me passed out in the venue's back hallway, the truth couldn't be hidden anymore. At first, they rallied around me. My parents paid for my first attempt at outpatient rehab. They let me move back home. They attended family therapy sessions. But after I relapsed twice, stealing my mother's credit card to buy pills the second time, their patience began wearing thin. The disappointment in my father's eyes hurt worse than any physical withdrawal. "We've tried everything, Amber," he said after finding me high in my childhood bedroom. "I don't know what else to do." The intervention came when I was 25. My family, alongside 2 of my childhood friends and a professional interventionist, confronted me in our living room. They had found a residential rehab facility 3 states away. I had 2 choices: go to the facility or lose my family's support entirely. I went. The first month of rehab was hell, the physical withdrawal, the shame, the anger, the fear. But slowly, painfully, I started to rebuild. I learned coping mechanisms that didn't involve chemicals. I uncovered the anxiety issues I'd been self-medicating. I connected with others who understood the grip of addiction. I found a sponsor named Rebecca who had been sober for 15 years and didn't take any of my excuses. After 6 months in the facility, I moved to a sober living house for another 6 months. Then, with Rebecca's help, I found a small apartment and an administrative assistant job at a local insurance company. Nothing glamorous, but it was honest work that paid the bills. I attended Narcotics Anonymous meetings 3 times a week. I journaled daily. I worked the steps. I stayed clean. By the time this Thanksgiving rolled around, I had been sober for 3 full years. I had the same apartment, had been promoted at work, and had cultivated a small circle of sober friends. I'd even started taking night classes to potentially resume my education someday. I was proud of my progress, even if it was slower than I'd hoped. My relationship with my family, however, remained complicated. My parents were cordial but distant. They invited me to Sunday dinners once a month, but these occasions were often tense. My father would watch how many trips I made to the bathroom. My mother would study my pupils when I arrived. They never left me alone with their wallets or checkbooks. "We're proud of you, honey," my mother would say, "but trust takes time to rebuild." 3 years apparently wasn't enough time. My sister Emily had warmed up slightly, occasionally meeting me for coffee, but she never invited me to her home where her 2 small children lived. "It's not that I don't trust you," she'd explain unconvincingly. "It's just that James and I are very protective of the girls." Only Jake, my younger brother, treated me somewhat normally. Now in his senior year of college, he would text me regularly and meet me for lunch when he was in town. "They'll come around," he'd assure me. "They just need more time." But it was my extended family that was even worse. My Aunt Margaret, my mother's sister, made no secret of her continued suspicion. At a family birthday party 6 months ago, I overheard her asking my mother if they were absolutely certain I was still clean. My cousin's wedding 3 months ago featured similar whispers, with relatives suddenly going quiet when I approached their tables. Thanksgiving at the Wright house had always been a major event. My mother spent days preparing, and relatives from both sides of the family would gather, about 30 people in total. The last Thanksgiving I had attended was 5 years ago, before my addiction spiraled out of control. For the past 3 years I had been excluded with various excuses. The first year I was still in sober living. The second year my mother claimed she was keeping it small, though Facebook photos proved otherwise, and now this year, I was simply not ready. The call had come 3 days before Thanksgiving. I had already bought a new sweater for the occasion and was planning to bring a sweet potato casserole, my grandmother's recipe that had always been a hit. "Amber, honey, your father and I have been talking," my mother began, her voice having that careful quality it took on when she was about to disappoint me. "We think it might be better if you skip Thanksgiving this year." "What, why?" The hurt was immediate, a physical sensation in my chest. "It's just that, well, Aunt Margaret and Uncle Bill will be there with all the cousins, and you know how Margaret can be. We don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position." "You mean you don't want to be uncomfortable?" I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I can handle Aunt Margaret." "It's not just that," my mother continued. "Cousin Melissa's new boyfriend will be there, and he's a substance abuse counselor. We thought that might be awkward for you." The irony was almost laughable. They thought I'd be uncomfortable around a substance abuse counselor. I spoke with people in recovery every day. "Mom, that's ridiculous. I'm not ashamed of my recovery." A long silence followed. Then my father's voice came on the line. He must have been listening on the extension. "Amber, we're just not sure you're ready yet. It's a big gathering. There will be wine flowing, and tensions can run high with family. We don't want to set you up for failure." "I've been sober for 3 years, Dad. I go to restaurants where alcohol is served. I attend work functions with open bars. I've proven I can handle it." "We know you've made progress," he said in that maddeningly calm voice, "but we need more time. Maybe Christmas will be better. We'll have a smaller gathering then." No amount of arguing changed their minds. They had already decided. I wasn't welcome at the family Thanksgiving table because they still saw me as a ticking time bomb, a potential embarrassment, a risk they weren't willing to take. After hanging up, I sat on my sofa staring at the wall for nearly an hour, the familiar shame and self-loathing threatening to overwhelm me. Was this how it would always be, forever marked by my worst mistakes, never fully trusted or included again? My phone lit up with a text from my mother. "We love you, honey. This is for the best. Maybe next year." Attached was a heart emoji that somehow made everything worse. When the initial shock of being excluded from Thanksgiving wore off, anger rushed in to fill the void. 3 years of sobriety, of showing up every day and fighting my demons, and it still wasn't enough for them. I paced my small apartment, alternating between furious tears and numb disbelief. My first instinct was to call my old friends, the ones who would understand how unfair this was, the ones who still used. They wouldn't judge me. They might even have something to help dull this pain. Instead, with shaking hands, I called Rebecca. "They don't want me there for Thanksgiving," I told her when she answered, my voice cracking. 3 years sober and they still don't trust me enough to sit at their table. Rebecca listened as I ranted about the unfairness, the continued punishment, the impossibility of ever being seen as anything other than an addict in my family's eyes. "Are you done?" she asked when I finally paused for breath. "I'm not going to tell you it doesn't suck, because it does," Rebecca said in her characteristic no-nonsense tone. "But here's the thing, Amber, what are you going to do with this? Are you going to let it defeat you, use it as an excuse to self-destruct, or are you going to use this as an opportunity?" "An opportunity for what?" I scoffed. "To be alone on Thanksgiving?" "An opportunity for self-care instead of self-pity," she replied. "Your recovery isn't for your family, it's for you. So what would make this day meaningful for you?" Her words cut through my anger. She was right. I couldn't control my family's actions, but I could control my response. If they weren't ready to welcome me, I would create my own celebration, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never really had Thanksgiving on my own before." "Then this is your chance to create something new," Rebecca said. "Something that honors how far you've come." After our call, I sat down with a notebook and began planning. If I was going to spend Thanksgiving alone, I would make it special. I decided to cook myself a proper meal, not a full turkey, but something festive. I would decorate my apartment. I would practice gratitude intentionally. I would treat myself with the dignity my family was currently unwilling to afford me. The next day I went grocery shopping. The store was packed with families buying last-minute ingredients, and a lump formed in my throat as I navigated the crowded aisles with my small cart. I selected a Cornish hen instead of a turkey, potatoes, green beans, and ingredients for a small sweet potato casserole, still honoring my grandmother's recipe even if no one else would taste it this year. As I placed my items on the checkout conveyor belt, the cashier, an older woman with kind eyes, smiled at me. "Having a small Thanksgiving this year, honey?" she asked. "Just me," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. Something in my tone must have given me away because her eyes softened with understanding. "Sometimes those can be the most peaceful," she said, scanning my items. My first Thanksgiving after my divorce, I thought I'd die of loneliness, turned out to be the first holiday in 20 years where nobody fought about politics or criticized my cooking. Made friends with myself that day. Her words stayed with me as I carried my groceries back to my apartment. Could this unwanted solitude actually be valuable in some way? Back home, I cleaned my apartment thoroughly and pulled out the few decorative items I had: a small ceramic pumpkin, some fall-colored candles, and a grateful sign I'd bought during my second year of sobriety. I arranged them on my coffee table and stepped back. It wasn't Martha Stewart, but it was mine. As evening fell, loneliness crept in again. I found myself staring at my phone, scrolling to names I hadn't contacted in years. People who would welcome me without judgment because they were still using themselves. One text and I could probably have pills within the hour. One call and I wouldn't have to feel this rejection so acutely. My thumb hovered over a contact named Tyler, my former dealer. 3 years of his messages unanswered. Would he even still have the same number? Instead, I called Rebecca again. "I'm thinking about calling Tyler," I admitted immediately, knowing I needed to speak the thought aloud to diffuse its power. "No, you're not," Rebecca said firmly. "You're thinking about escaping this pain, but you know where that path leads, and it's not where you want to go. What's your plan for tomorrow?" I told her about my shopping trip and my modest decoration. "Good," she said. "Now add some structure. What time will you wake up? What will you do first? Make a schedule so you're not just sitting around feeling sorry for yourself." We mapped out my Thanksgiving day hour by hour. I would wake up early and go for a run. I would watch the parade on TV. I would start cooking at noon. I would eat at 3, the same time my family would be gathering. I would call Rebecca if I felt triggered. I would attend the evening meeting at the community center. "Remember why you're doing this," Rebecca said before we hung up. "Not for their approval, but for your life." That night I added one more item to my Thanksgiving plan. I pulled out a fresh journal and began writing a list of things I was genuinely grateful for despite everything: my sobriety, my apartment, my job, Rebecca, my health, the clarity of mind that allowed me to feel everything, even the painful things, fully and honestly. The last item I wrote surprised me: the chance to prove to myself that I can create meaning even in rejection. I woke up early on Thanksgiving morning to the buzzing of my phone. Rolling over, I found several notifications waiting. There was a group text from my mother to the family chat I was still part of: "Kitchen's already busy. Can't wait to see everyone at 3. Attached was a photo of the dining room table, beautifully set for what appeared to be at least 20 people. She hadn't removed me from the group chat. Was that toughlessness or a subtle form of cruelty? There were also Instagram stories from various cousins traveling to my parents' house, excited captions about the feast to come. My sister had posted a picture of her daughters in matching Thanksgiving dresses with the caption, "Ready to see the family." The family that apparently didn't include me. The familiar burn of resentment flared in my chest. I could so easily fall into a pit of self-pity, spending the day refreshing social media to torture myself with images of the gathering I'd been deemed unworthy to attend. Instead, I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and followed the schedule Rebecca had helped me create. I changed into running clothes and headed out for a 3-mile loop around my neighborhood. The streets were quiet, most people already busy with holiday preparations. The crisp November air cleared my head, and the physical exertion helped dissipate some of the tension I'd been carrying. Back at my apartment, I showered and made a special breakfast: French toast with the good maple syrup I usually saved for special occasions. As I ate, I turned on the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, a tradition from childhood that brought unexpected comfort. Around 11, I checked my phone again. Among the continued family posts was a direct text from my brother Jake: "You okay today?" My fingers hovered over the screen. I could lie and say I was fine. I could guilt trip him for being there when I couldn't be. Instead, I opted for honesty. Managing, I typed back, "Made myself breakfast and watching the parade, going to cook a small dinner later." His response came quickly. "This is Bees, you know. I told Mom and Dad they were being unfair." "You did? I hadn't expected anyone to advocate for me." "Yeah, big argument last night. Dad said you're still finding your footing, and Mom kept bringing up how Aunt Margaret would react. I told them you've been sober longer than you were using, and they're moving the goalposts." Tears pricked at my eyes. Jake had stood up for me when I wasn't there to defend myself. "Thanks for that," I wrote. "Means a lot." "Want me to come by later?" he offered. "I can make an excuse and skip out after dinner." I considered it. Having Jake's company would certainly make the day less lonely, but something held me back, perhaps pride, perhaps a determination to prove to myself that I could handle this day on my own terms. "I appreciate the offer, but I'll be okay," I replied. "Don't cause more family drama on my account. We can grab lunch next week." "Definitely," he responded, adding, "For what it's worth, Emily seems uncomfortable with the situation too. She kept changing the subject when Mom was explaining why you weren't coming." This surprised me even more than Jake's support. Emily had kept me at arm's length since my addiction, protective of her perfect family image. The thought that she might feel conflicted about my exclusion was unexpected. As I prepared to start cooking, I remembered a suggestion from my therapist to reach out to my support network during potentially triggering occasions. I logged onto the online recovery forum I'd joined during my time in sober living and posted about my situation: excluded from family Thanksgiving after 3 years sober. Trying to create my own meaningful day instead of dwelling on hurt. Any others spending the holiday solo? I set my phone aside and began preparing my modest feast, not expecting much response. When I checked back an hour later, I was astonished to find over 30 replies. People from across the country and even a few international members had shared their own experiences of family estrangement, holiday loneliness, and the strategies they used to cope. "First 5 Thanksgiving sober, my family forgot to invite me," wrote someone with the username Phoenix Rising. "Year 6 they finally did. Now in year 12 I host the whole thing. Hang in there. Made myself a turkey sandwich and watched movies last year. Shared sober since 18. This year got invited back. Progress isn't linear, but it happens. My family never came around. Admitted 15 years clean. Built my own chosen family instead. Having them over today. Sometimes the family you create is more nurturing than the one you were born into." Their stories gave me perspective and hope. Some had eventually reconciled with their families, others had created new traditions. All of them had stayed sober through the rejection, which was ultimately what mattered most. As I continued reading, a notification appeared: an invitation to join a virtual Thanksgiving gathering for members of the recovery community who were alone for the holiday. It would start at 2 p.m., hosted by a longtime moderator named Charles. I hesitated only briefly before accepting. What did I have to lose? While chopping vegetables for my casserole, my phone rang. It was Rebecca, right on schedule. "How's it going?" she asked. I told her about Jake's supportive messages and the online recovery community's responses. "See," she said, "you're not as alone as you feel. There's a whole community of people who understand exactly what you're going through." "I know," I admitted. "I just wish my family could see me the way they do, as someone who's worked hard to change, not just as the sum of my mistakes." "They might get there eventually," Rebecca said, "but their timeline isn't yours. Your recovery doesn't depend on their recognition." After we hung up, I continued cooking with a lighter heart. The Cornish hen was seasoned and in the oven, the potatoes were boiling, the green beans were trimmed, and my grandmother's sweet potato casserole, smaller than usual but made with the same love, was ready for baking. It wasn't the Thanksgiving I had hoped for, but I was creating something meaningful from what could have been just another day of self-pity. And strangely enough, I felt a flicker of gratitude for this chance to prove my resilience to myself. At exactly 2 p.m., I settled onto my couch with my laptop and clicked the link to the virtual Thanksgiving gathering. My small dining table was visible behind me, set for one with my nicest plate and a candle, my food keeping warm in the oven until after the meeting. The screen filled with faces, about 15 people of various ages, genders, and backgrounds, all united by the common experience of addiction and recovery. Some appeared to be in apartments like mine, while others were in more elaborate settings. One woman had clearly gone all out with Thanksgiving decorations visible behind her. An older man sat in what looked like a cabin with a stone fireplace. The host, Charles, was a distinguished-looking man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He welcomed everyone with a warmth that immediately put me at ease. "Welcome to our Thanksgiving gathering," he began. "I'm Charles, recovering alcoholic, 15 years sober. I started hosting these virtual gatherings during the pandemic. but we've kept them going because, let's face it, holidays can be complicated for people in recovery. Whether you're alone by choice or circumstance today, you're not truly alone. You're here with people who understand the journey. He invited everyone to introduce themselves briefly and share why they were attending. The stories varied widely. A young man named Derek, whose family had cut ties when he entered recovery, unable to admit their own substance issues. A middle-aged woman called Sophia, spending her first holiday after divorce. An older woman named Maria, who lived too far from family to travel. A college student who couldn't afford to fly home. When my turn came, I took a deep breath. I'm Amber, I'm 28, and I'm 3 years clean from opioid addiction, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. My family decided I'm not ready to join their Thanksgiving this year. Despite my sobriety, I'm trying to see it as an opportunity to create my own meaning today rather than falling into resentment. Several people nodded in recognition of my situation, and I felt a surprising connection to these strangers who understood what my own family couldn't seem to grasp. Charles guided us through a gratitude exercise, inviting each person to share something unexpected they were grateful for in recovery, not the obvious things like health or clarity, but the surprising gifts sobriety had brought. I'm grateful for my ability to feel difficult emotions without numbing them, shared a woman named Tanya. Even though it hurts sometimes, it means I'm fully alive. I'm grateful for the mundane responsibilities I can now handle, said a young man named Marcus. Paying bills on time, showing up for work, remembering birthday stuff most people take for granted, but that was impossible when I was using. When my turn came, I surprised myself with my answer. I'm grateful for this test of my recovery. Being excluded from family Thanksgiving would have been a perfect excuse to relapse in the past. The fact that I'm here instead, creating something positive, shows me how much I've grown. As the sharing continued, Maria, a grandmother in her 60s with a melodic accent, told a story that particularly resonated with me. My family excluded me from gatherings for 5 years after I got sober, she said, not because I was still using, but because when I stopped drinking, I stopped enabling their dysfunction, I stopped keeping family secrets, I stopped pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. That made them more uncomfortable than my alcoholism ever did. Several people murmured in agreement, and Charles nodded thoughtfully. Family systems resist change, he observed. When one person changes dramatically, as we all have in recovery, it forces everyone else to adjust. Some families can or won't make that adjustment, at least not quickly. Your recovery forces them to look at their own issues. And not everyone is ready for that mirror. Derek, a man in his 30s with tattoos visible on his forearms, shared his journey of creating a chosen family after permanent estrangement from his relatives. My blood family never came around, he said matter-of-factly. But I built connections with people who accept me as I am now, not who I was then. Today I'm having dinner with my sponsor's family after this call. 10 years ago I was shooting up in a gas station bathroom. I count that as progress. When it was my turn to share again, I spoke about my feelings of unworthiness that still surfaced despite my progress. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be good enough again in their eyes, I admitted. If 3 years isn't enough, will 5 be 10, or am I permanently damaged in their view? The group's response was supportive but also challenging in the best way. You're asking the wrong question, Charles said gently. The question isn't when you'll be good enough for them, but whether their standard is reasonable or helpful for anyone involved. Recovery isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole, authentic, and responsible. It sounds like you're doing that work. The question is whether they're doing theirs. We discussed the concept of boundaries, not just the ones we needed to establish for our recovery, but also the ones we needed to recognize in others. My family had set a boundary, however hurtful or unfair it felt. I could acknowledge that boundary while also setting my own. I would not let their judgment define my worth or progress. Remember that their timeline isn't necessarily about you, said Sophia, who had mentioned being a therapist before her own addiction. It's about their fear, their uncertainty, their comfort level. You can't control that. You can only control your response to it. As our scheduled hour together drew to a close, Charles suggested we all show our Thanksgiving creations, whether elaborate meals or simple sandwiches. People held up plates of food to their cameras, everything from traditional turkey dinners to Chinese takeout to vegan feasts. I showed my modest but carefully prepared spread and received genuine compliments. There was something powerful about sharing this meal virtually with people who understood the significance of creating celebration in the face of exclusion. Before we sign off, Charles said, let's exchange contact information in the chat for anyone who would like ongoing support. Holidays don't end after today, and neither does recovery. I found myself exchanging numbers with several members, particularly Maria, whose story of family reconciliation gave me hope, and Derek, whose resilience in permanent estrangement gave me perspective. As I said goodbye to the group and closed my laptop, I realized I felt something unexpected, genuinely thankful, not for the exclusion but for this new connection, this reminder that I was part of a larger community who understood both my struggles and my strengths. I moved to my table, lit the candle, and sat down to enjoy the meal I had prepared for myself. For the first time that day, the empty chairs around me didn't feel like an indictment, but simply a circumstance, one that might change in time or might not. Either way, I would be okay. I had just finished washing my dinner dishes when a knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone, and visitors were rare at my modest apartment complex. For a brief paranoid moment, I wondered if my parents had sent someone to check on me to make sure I hadn't fallen off the wagon in my solitude. Through the peephole, I saw Jake's familiar face, and my heart leapt. I opened the door to find not only my younger brother but also, to my shock, my sister Emily standing beside him. "Surprise," Jake said with an uncertain smile. "We brought reinforcements and leftovers." Emily held up a canvas bag that clearly contained food containers. She looked uncomfortable but determined, her usually perfectly styled hair slightly messy, as if she'd left in a hurry. "Can we come in?" she asked, her voice more tentative than I was used to hearing from my confident older sister. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "I just wasn't expecting anyone." They entered my apartment. Then I suddenly saw it through their eyes: the modest furnishings, the small kitchen, the Thanksgiving for one now cleared away except for the candle still burning on the table. It was a far cry from the spacious house where we'd grown up or Emily's immaculate suburban home. An awkward silence fell as they stood in my living room. Jake broke it first. "We couldn't do it," he said simply. "We couldn't sit through that whole dinner pretending it was okay that you weren't there." Emily nodded, setting the bag of food on my coffee table. "It felt wrong," she added, not quite meeting my eyes. I gestured for them to sit, still processing their unexpected appearance. "What about the rest of dinner? Won't Mom and Dad be upset you left?" Jake shrugged. "We ate the main course, made excuses about meeting friends for dessert. They were suspicious but couldn't exactly stop us." "I left the girls with James," Emily explained, referring to her husband and daughters. "He understood. Actually, he's been saying for a while that we've been unfair to you." This admission from Emily, who had been perhaps the most overtly judgmental about my addiction, left me momentarily speechless. "What changed?" I finally asked. Jake looked at Emily, clearly wanting her to explain. She sighed and finally met my gaze. "When Mom told us you weren't coming, she made it sound like it was a mutual decision, that you weren't ready for a big family gathering. But then Jake told me he'd texted you and realized you'd been deliberately excluded." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "It didn't sit right with me." "It was more than that," Jake interjected. "Tell her what happened with Aunt Margaret." Emily grimaced. Aunt Margaret kept making these comments during dinner, about how nice it was to have a drama-free Thanksgiving, how she was relieved not to have to worry about her purse. Dad kept trying to change the subject, but she wouldn't let up. "And that's when Emily snapped," Jake added, with something like pride. "I didn't snap," Emily corrected primly. "I just pointed out that it was inappropriate to speak about you that way when you weren't there to defend yourself, especially considering you've been sober for 3 years." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Emily had defended me? "Anyway," Jake continued, "that led to this whole tense discussion about whether you should have been invited. Mom said they were just trying to protect the holiday from potential issues. Dad claimed they were protecting you from judgment. Aunt Margaret said some really nasty stuff about addicts never changing. And I realized," Emily cut in, her voice softer now, "that I've been part of the problem. I've been holding your past against you even while claiming to support your recovery. It's not right, Amber." I felt tears threatening but held them back. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot." Jake stood up and began unpacking the food containers they'd brought. "We figured you might want some traditional Thanksgiving stuff." Emily snuck out Mom's stuffing and some pie. I grabbed turkey and cranberry sauce. "I already ate, but I'll definitely have room for Mom's stuffing later," I said, trying to keep my voice light despite the emotions swirling inside me. As Jake arranged the food in my refrigerator, Emily looked around my apartment more carefully. "It's nice," she said, sounding slightly surprised. "Cozy." "It's not much, but it's mine," I replied, "paid for with my legitimate job, no shortcuts." I hadn't meant it as a dig, but Emily flinched slightly. "You've really rebuilt your life, haven't you?" "I'm trying every day," I hesitated, then added, "Would you like to see something?" Without waiting for her answer, I went to my bedroom and returned with a small wooden box. Inside were my sobriety coins, one for each month of the first year, then the yearly ones, and my recovery journal, filled with daily reflections from the past 3 years. "This is what not ready looks like," I said, opening the journal to show the consistent daily entries. "This is me showing up for myself even when no one else could see it." Emily took the journal gingerly, as if it might burn her, and read a few entries. Her eyes widened. "You write in this every day?" "Every single day. It's part of my recovery program. Accountability, gratitude, honesty, all the things I avoided when I was using." Jake returned from the kitchen and peered over Emily's shoulder at the journal. "Whoa, that's dedication." "That's survival," I corrected gently. An awkward silence fell again, but this time it felt different, thoughtful rather than tense. "I'm sorry," Emily finally said, her voice cracking slightly. "I've been so judgmental, so afraid that if I let you too close to my life, to my girls, that somehow your past would— I don't even know what I thought, that addiction is contagious, that you'd be a bad influence." It sounds so stupid saying it out loud. "It's not stupid," I replied. "It's fear. I get it. I hurt everyone when I was using, especially the family. Trust doesn't come back overnight." "But 3 years isn't overnight," Jake pointed out. "That's longer than some of Emily's friends have been married, and she lets them babysit." Emily shot him an annoyed look but didn't dispute the point. "Do you guys want some coffee?" I offered, wanting to shift to more comfortable ground. "I even have pumpkin spice creamer for the holiday." As I made coffee, the conversation gradually became easier. Jake told stories about his senior year antics, Emily shared funny tales about her daughter's preschool adventures, and I talked about my night classes and tentative plans to eventually return to school. On an impulse, I suggested we take a selfie together. Rebel Thanksgiving, Jake dubbed it. The resulting photo showed the three Wright siblings crammed together on my small sofa, coffee mugs raised in a toast, genuine smiles on all our faces for perhaps the first time in years. As the evening progressed, our conversation turned to childhood memories, camping trips before our parents could afford vacations, the treehouse our father had built that collapsed the first time all three of us climbed into it, the secret language we had invented to communicate during family car trips. "Remember when you convinced me that the ice cream truck only played music when it was out of ice cream?" asked Jake, laughing. "That was genius," he grinned. "You never asked for money for like 2 whole summers." "You were a monster," I accused playfully. "And you," he pointed at Emily, "told me that if I swallowed watermelon seeds they would grow in my stomach and come out my ears." Emily laughed. "I forgot about that. You were so gullible." It struck me that we hadn't reminisced like this in years, not since before my addiction took hold. We had been relating to each other only in the present tense, with the weight of my past hanging over every interaction. This felt like reclaiming something precious I had thought was lost forever. As the evening wound down, Emily surprised me by suggesting we meet for lunch the following week and bring the girls. She added hesitantly, "They should get to know their aunt." Jake mentioned a concert he had tickets for the following month and asked if I wanted to join him. "It's at a bar," he warned, "but they have good non-alcoholic options." I checked. The fact that he had considered this detail, had thought about my needs without my prompting, touched me deeply. When they finally prepared to leave, Emily hugged me tightly. "This wasn't how I expected to spend Thanksgiving evening," she admitted, "but I'm glad we came." "Me too," I said simply, knowing that anything more would bring tears I wasn't ready to shed in front of them. As I closed the door behind them, I leaned against it and allowed those tears to fall freely, not from sadness or self-pity, but from a complex mixture of gratitude, hope, and the bittersweet recognition that healing was possible, even if it came in unexpected ways and on an unpredictable timeline. The day after Thanksgiving, my phone rang while I was still having my morning coffee. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hello?" Amber, my mother's voice was tight with barely contained anger. "Did you ask Jake and Emily to leave dinner yesterday?" I kept my voice calm, drawing on techniques I'd learned in therapy. "No, Mom, their visit was a complete surprise to me. They left right after the main course, making some excuse about meeting friends. Then we see on Instagram that they're at your apartment. What were we supposed to think?" I noticed she said "we." My father was likely listening again, possibly other family members too. "I understand why you're upset," I replied, deliberately not becoming defensive. "But I didn't plan this. They showed up unexpectedly. I was as surprised as you are." "Your father and I need to talk to you," she said after a pause, "in person." My heart raced. The old Amber would have either avoided this confrontation or gone in with guns blazing. Neither approach had ever been productive. "I think that's a good idea," I agreed. "Would you like to come to my apartment?" No, she answered quickly, too quickly. She had never visited my apartment in the 3 years I'd lived there. Let's meet somewhere, neutral, the coffee shop near the mall, Sunday at 2. That works for me, I said. After hanging up, I immediately texted Rebecca to let her know about the upcoming meeting. Proud of you for agreeing to talk, she replied. Remember your boundaries. This is a conversation, not a trial. Sunday arrived with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, ordered a chai latte, and chose a table in the corner where we could speak with some privacy. I had dressed carefully in a conservative sweater and jeans, looking put together but not like I was trying too hard. My parents arrived precisely at 2 p.m. My father, tall and now fully gray, looked uncomfortable in the casual setting. My mother, as always, was perfectly groomed, her face set in the neutral expression she wore when preparing for difficult conversations. They ordered coffee and joined me at the table. An awkward silence fell as they arranged themselves. Thank you for meeting me, I began, deciding to take control of the conversation from the start. I understand you're upset about Thanksgiving. Upset doesn't begin to cover it, my father said. Your mother spent weeks planning that meal. For Jake and Emily to just leave in the middle of it was incredibly disrespectful. To be clear, I said calmly, I didn't ask them to come. They made that choice on their own. But why would they do that? My mother asked, her voice rising slightly. Everything was fine until they suddenly had to go see you. I took a sip of my chai, gathering my thoughts. Was it really fine, Mom? From what they told me, Aunt Margaret was making some pretty harsh comments about me. My mother had the grace to look uncomfortable. Margaret can be opinionated, you know that, but that's not why we asked you not to come. We were trying to protect you from exactly that kind of situation. Were you protecting me, or were you protecting yourselves from potential discomfort? I asked, using a technique from therapy of questioning the narrative without accusation, because excluding me sent a pretty clear message to the entire family that I'm still not trustworthy after 3 years of sobriety. That's not fair, my father interjected. We've supported your recovery every step of the way. Have you? I asked, still keeping my voice level. You've never visited my apartment. You watch me like a hawk when I'm at your house. You didn't trust me to handle a family holiday after 3 years of proven sobriety. That doesn't feel like support, it feels like perpetual punishment. My mother's eyes filled with tears. You don't understand what it's like to watch your child destroy herself, to live in constant fear of a relapse or an overdose. Every time the phone rings at an odd hour, I still panic, thinking it might be the hospital, or worse. Her raw emotion caught me off guard. Through all the family therapy sessions, she had maintained her composure, never truly revealing the depth of her fear. I do understand it's been traumatic for you too, I acknowledged. Addiction affects the whole family, but at some point we have to move forward. I can't keep paying for past mistakes indefinitely. We're trying, my father said, his voice softer now, but trust takes time to rebuild. It's been 3 years, Dad. How much more time do you need? What specifically do I need to do to prove myself to you? I pulled out my sobriety journal, the same one I had shown Jake and Emily. This is 3 years of daily work, 3 years of therapy meetings, honesty and effort. I'm not perfect, but I'm not the person I was during my addiction either. My parents looked at the journal but didn't reach for it. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Your aunt's husband died of an overdose, she said suddenly, before you were born. That's why she's so harsh about addiction. She never told anyone outside the family. This revelation stunned me. I had no idea. She sees you and thinks of him, my mother continued. It's not fair to you, but that's where her fear comes from, and I think maybe that's affected how we see your recovery too. We're so afraid of history repeating itself. Mom, I said gently, I understand fear. I live with it every day. Fear of relapse, fear of never being trusted again, fear of always being defined by my worst moments. But I can't let that fear control my life, and neither can you. A silence fell as my words sank in. What would you suggest we do? My father finally asked, and I heard a new tone in his voice. He was genuinely asking for my input rather than telling me what would happen. I'd like us to try family therapy again, I said, having considered this request carefully. Not just a session or two like before, but a real commitment to working through this together, and in the meantime, I'd like to be included in family events. I'm not asking for immediate perfect trust, just for the opportunity to show up and be present as I am now, not as who I was then. My mother looked at my father, some unspoken communication passing between them. We can do that, my father agreed after a moment, the therapy at least. As for events, we have the Christmas party at our house in 3 weeks. It will be smaller than Thanksgiving, just us, Jake, Emily, and her family. Would you like to come? It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was a start, a genuine offer rather than an excuse. I would like that very much, I said. My mother reached across the table and took my hand, the first time she had initiated physical contact in years. I miss you, Amber, the real you. Sometimes I see glimpses of her coming back and I want to believe she's really there to stay. She is, I assured her, squeezing her hand, but she's also changed. I'm never going to be exactly the person I was before addiction. Some ways I'm stronger, some ways I'm more vulnerable. I need you to see and accept who I am now. We'll try, she promised, and for the first time in years I actually believed her. As we parted in the parking lot, our goodbye was awkward but held a new tentative warmth. No great declarations or dramatic reconciliations, just small steps toward a new understanding. We'll call you about setting up that therapy appointment, my father said, giving me a brief hug. As I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in years, not because everything was fixed, it wasn't and wouldn't be for a long time, if ever, but because for the first time, I had advocated for myself without anger or shame, and my parents had actually listened. 1 month later, I stood on my parents' doorstep, a homemade cranberry cake in my hands and nervous anticipation in my stomach. It was Christmas Eve, and I had been invited to the family dinner, the first holiday gathering I would attend since my exclusion from Thanksgiving. The door opened, and my mother welcomed me with a smile that seemed only slightly forced. "Merry Christmas, honey. Come in, everyone's in the living room." The house was decorated as elaborately as I remembered from childhood, the massive tree with color-coordinated ornaments, garlands on the staircase, the nativity scene that had been in our family for generations. The familiar scents of pine, cinnamon, and my mother's roast beef filled the air. Emily and James were already there with their daughters, 5-year-old Sophie and 3-year-old Lily. Jake was helping our father adjust the star on top of the tree. It was a scene of perfect family harmony, the kind that had seemed forever closed to me. "And Amber," Sophie called out, surprising me. I hadn't expected Emily's children to know who I was, given how carefully she had kept them from me. "Mommy said you're bringing dessert." Emily caught my eye across the room and gave me a small nod. She had been preparing her daughters for my presence, it seemed. "I sure did," I replied, kneeling to the child's level. "Do you like cranberries?" The initial awkwardness gradually eased as the evening progressed. It wasn't perfect, there were still moments of tension, particularly when my father reflexively checked his wallet after leaving it on the counter near me. I pretended not to notice, focusing instead on the positive changes. In the months since our coffee shop conversation, we had attended 3 family therapy sessions with a specialist in addiction and family systems. The process had been challenging but productive. My parents were learning to separate their fear from their perception of my current reality. I was learning to understand the trauma my addiction had caused them, while still maintaining healthy boundaries. My relationship with Jake had strengthened considerably. We had gone to the concert he mentioned, and he had introduced me to his college friends without shame or qualification. To them, I was just Jake's sister, not Jake's recovering addict sister. Emily had taken smaller but equally significant steps. We had met for lunch twice, once with her daughters present. She was cautious but making visible efforts to reintegrate me into her life. The extended family remained more of a challenge. Aunt Margaret and several cousins had declined my mother's invitation to Christmas dinner when they learned I would be present. Rather than excluding me this time, my mother had stood firm, a small victory that meant more than she probably realized. After dinner, as Jake and James cleaned up the kitchen and the girls played with their new toys, my mother pulled me aside into the study. "I have something for you," she said, handing me a wrapped package. "It's not your main gift that's under the tree. This is something else." I unwrapped it carefully to find a framed photograph I had never seen before. It showed me at about 10 years old, hair in pigtails, concentrating intently as I built an elaborate sand castle at the beach. My face was alight with focus and joy. "I found this while going through old albums," my mother explained. "It reminded me of who you've always been, at your core, determined, creative, focused when something matters to you. I see that same determination in your recovery." Tears stung my eyes as I studied the image of my younger self, untouched by addiction, trauma, or shame. "Thank you," I whispered. "This means a lot." The therapist suggested we look for continuity between who you were before addiction and who you are now, she said, not to pretend the difficult years didn't happen, but to recognize that they don't define your entire life. It was perhaps the most insightful thing my mother had ever said about my recovery. "We're trying, Amber," she added, her voice catching. "It's not easy to let go of fear, but we're trying." "I know," I assured her. "That's all I can ask." As we rejoined the family in the living room, I felt a sense of cautious peace. The road ahead would still have difficulties. Addiction had changed all of us in ways that couldn't be undone. Trust would remain a work in progress. Some family members might never fully accept my recovery. But something fundamental had shifted since that solitary Thanksgiving. Looking around at my family, imperfect, wounded, trying, I thought about the unexpected gifts that had come from being excluded that day, the connections I had made in the recovery community, the strength I had found in creating my own celebration, the catalyst it had provided for Jake and Emily to take a stand, the conversation it had ultimately forced with my parents. Sometimes I realized, the table we create for ourselves when excluded from another is exactly where we need to be, and sometimes that second table becomes a bridge back to the first. As Sophie climbed into my lap to show me her new doll, I caught Emily's eye across the room. She gave me a genuine smile, small, tentative, but real. One day at a time, it was how I approached my sobriety, and now it was how I approached family healing as well. Not perfect, not complete, but possible, and for tonight, that was enough. Have you ever had to create your own celebration when excluded from a family gathering? How did you turn rejection into an opportunity for growth? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about recovery, family healing, and finding strength in unexpected places. Remember, sometimes the most meaningful traditions are the ones we create ourselves. Thank you for watching, and may you find peace and belonging this holiday season, whether at a family table or one of your own making.